each other as well.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to
People aren't here.
this evening. This is the first night of Southampton University's Events Week, and we're so happy to have you with us. I'm Gemma.
And I'm Serene.
And we're your hosts for this evening. So tonight our talk is about if religion provides any truth in the scientific world. And so we have a few questions that we're wondering if you guys have the answer.
Yeah, so as people are joining, we'll just ask the questions and feel free to type the answers in the chat. And yeah.
Yeah, so Serene, what do you think? Are there more trees on the Earth or stars in the Milky Way?
That's such a weird one because, like, obviously you've got the rainforests and jungles and all that, but then stars, like, you'd think there'd be a lot of stars.
Yeah, and the
right?
Milky Way is huge.
Oh yeah, and like stars are like a lot smaller. Well, actually a lot bigger, but like
they look smaller to us.
Yeah, so you think there'd be more, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, Gemma.
Yeah, what are you guys thinking? Keep posting your answers down below. So there's actually more trees on Earth, which I think is really surprising.
Yeah, because I think, especially, you know, deforestation and all of that stuff that's going on, you would think that there would be more stars. I guess also the trees would be more changeable than like stars.
Yeah.
Is that right? Or do stars come and go?
I'll be honest with you guys, I don't study science. But 3 trillion is 3 followed by 12 zeros, which is the number of trees on Earth, and more than the number of stars in the Milky Way, and actually more than the number of cells in a human brain.
Do you know how many cells there are in a human brain?
No, do you?
But also, isn't it, okay, this is going off tangent, but like, also, isn't like your tongue got like a lot of muscles or something in it? Is that not a thing?
Your tongue's the only like part of your body that's a muscle that's only attached at one end.
Really? Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, because, well, it is only attached.
Yeah, okay, but I guess I haven't thought about that before. Wait, so there are more trees than even number of cells in the brain?
Yeah, apparently.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, correct us if we're wrong, but that's what we found out
on
our
good old
Google adventures earlier. Okay, another question for you guys to be responding to. What does a Geiger counter measure? Is it A, radiation, B, air pollution, or C, how reactive a metal is?
Now, I don't even know how to pronounce this word. I was saying earlier, Geiger, so...
I think it's Geiger. We're hoping he's from German descent.
Oh my gosh, it's a person's name.
I think so.
Right, I did not know that.
Again, be correcting us down. Let us know.
Okay. A Geiger counter used to measure A, radiation, B, air pollution, or C, how reactive a metal is.
Now, I think I heard about this in physics.
Really?
But I haven't done physics since year 11.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I only did physics in year 11 too.
Well, I did it up to year 11, but yeah, since then, not so much.
What's your favourite metal though?
Favourite metal?
Do you have a favourite metal?
Probably tin.
Tin? Why would it be tin?
Well, I feel like it's the most commonly used.
Right, I think iron's pretty good.
Okay.
Because it's like the most hard but then also malleable. Coming out with all these scientific terms today,
Gemma. I'm not sure. Anyway, if you're wondering about the Geiger counter, it is actually used to measure radiation. So
is that like radioactivity, right? You know, I've been playing this game called Wonder Woman Bingo, and Marie Curie, she invented radiation and
She invented it or she found it?
Discovered radioactivity and invented 2 elements.
Wow. There you go. Serena's full of the fun facts this evening. Okay. For those of you that just tuned in, you are at the right thing. We are here for Southampton University's Events Week, the big conversation. And tonight we're talking about if religion provides any truth in our scientific world.
Hence
So just before we get
questions.
started, we're doing some science questions.
Yeah, so this is a good one, a bit different.
Mhm.
So keep writing your answers in the chat and talking about them with your housemates, you know. So Gemma, which is the fastest? The top speed of a giraffe or the fastest speed attained by a human-powered aircraft? Do you think giraffes are quick?
See, in my head, giraffes aren't very quick. The only thing
Imagine
I
they
know
get
about
like a gallop
giraffes,
going.
I've never seen a giraffe.
Did you not watch David Attenborough?
I do like David Attenborough, but I feel like you only get a sense of these things when you see them in real life.
Have you seen them in real life?
A giraffe, no. I've seen an elephant. Elephants are huge.
But you know giraffes, so when they like fight, they go with their like neck.
Yeah, so I just think of them for being really tall. I don't think of them as quick.
Okay, so giraffe or a human-powered aircraft, which is the fastest?
Well, I think aircrafts go pretty quick nowadays.
Yeah, but this is human-powered.
Oh, okay.
This is like in Those Magnificent Men and the Flying Machine kind of vibes.
Oh, you know what? I really don't know. What was your initial?
My gut reaction would be I think kind of the aircraft, because you know you get the be streamlined and get the resistance right. You know, you could be flying through the air.
Yeah. Well, do you know what it actually is? Do we have an answer for this one?
We do have an answer, and the answer is a giraffe.
See, that really surprises me. But I guess it is a human-powered aircraft, and giraffes do have really long legs, so like when they get going, they would be pretty fast.
Yeah, right. Good question.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one similar vibe to the last one.
Yeah.
Which of these has the greatest mass? Do you think it's an Airbus A380, if that's how you say that?
Yeah.
Or the Statue of Liberty?
I don't know, but have you been on an Airbus A380?
I think from the way that I didn't know how to be, we can guess I don't.
Yeah,
I haven't.
Point. Yeah, because some fun story. We once went on an Airbus A380, and it's because they have got like 2 levels, and then we got to like look around, you know, go up to first class.
Oh,
I know.
Very fancy. Can't say I've done that one either.
The Statue of Liberty, that would be pretty massful, because
Massive.
because does it include the bit at like the bottom as well?
I assume so, the bit that it stands on.
Right, because that'd be part of the statue.
Yeah, I assume so.
Okay, so what's your gut reaction, Gemma?
Well, I think the Airbus A380 must have a lot of parts that would all individually be very heavy. But then you've got to remember it's got to fly.
Okay, I hadn't thought about the individual parts of the Airbus A380.
But it has to be able to fly, whereas the Statue of Liberty never has to fly.
Does it not?
Oh, revelations here tonight. So yeah, I think I would go for the Statue of Liberty.
The Statue of Liberty.
What are you thinking?
Well, now you said the point about the Airbus A380 having different parts. I'm going to go Airbus A380.
If you've said Airbus A380 with Serene, you would be correct. That does have the greater mass.
What's your favourite science?
My favourite science. Okay, so it was biology for like GCSE, because I feel like maybe it was just my school.
You knew stuff.
It was just more fun. And like my chemistry teacher always used to make fun of me.
Really?
And my physics teacher I just didn't, no one liked physics at my school.
Oh.
But then I ended up doing chemistry in sixth form. So then in sixth form, chemistry was my favourite. Which was yours?
I don't know, but in chemistry it was always fun when you had the Bunsen burners, and then we'd always just put things in it, and it would light up. So the teacher would be like, "What's going on?" But biology, yeah, you can't go wrong. You know, yeah, that is a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one.
But yeah. There we go.
Yeah, I think we've had enough of us talking and our questions for this evening. But well done if you joined in and if you got any of those right. Yeah, so like we said before, this evening's talk is about science and discussing if religion provides any truth in our scientific world. So we're going to be having a talk this evening with Michael. And hopefully we'll be joined by Michael now.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael, how are you?
Good, thank you. Hi.
thank you so much for coming to join us this evening. Do you mind if we ask you just a couple of questions to get to know you before you give us our talk?
Of course.
So, what do you do? And
what was your favourite
science? I was
science?
going to ask that, yeah.
What was my favourite science at school? Definitely physics. I was awful at chemistry. I didn't like my biology teacher, which always bodes badly for like your desire to study the subject. But physics I did quite well, which is why I continued to AS level after my GCSE. Somehow I still managed to get a decent grade despite the fact I kept failing chemistry. I think I must have just made up for it with physics.
Very good. And
what
do you do now?
I'm not a physicist, you'll be glad to know, or a chemist. I work as a speaker and author. I'm based in Marlow in Buckinghamshire, just between Oxford and London. Most of my time is speaking at university events, a bit like this one at the moment, lots of them online, in the kind of pre-COVID world, and hopefully maybe in the future as well. That will be actually on campus, obviously, speaking for groups here in the UK, but also in other parts of Europe and also further afield as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Michael. Michael also has a special guest, but we're going to let him introduce her to all of you. So yeah, Michael, we're going to hand over to you now.
Great. Thanks, guys. And great to be with all of you tonight, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're in Southampton itself or whether you're watching from somewhere else. And great to have Emma Nichols with us tonight. So Emma is our special guest. Now, if you watched the video on YouTube or Facebook earlier, you may have heard that our special guest was John Lennox. And you might be thinking, why have we gone from John Lennox to Emma Nichols? Or is this like John Lennox in disguise? Well, I can assure you it's not John Lennox in disguise.
I'll rip off my disguise, suddenly be John Lennox.
Yeah, John Lennox is a lot better looking this evening. Basically, John would have been our guest this evening. Sadly, John's been unwell and he's had to go into hospital today. So we trust that he will recover quickly. But Emma has stepped into John's Oxford shoes. Apart from, Emma, you're not from Oxford, are you? You're from the rivals.
No, I'm in Cambridge at the minute. So Cambridge, true to my heart.
Yeah, so we could have had a bit of a battle tonight. So we could have had Oxford, Cambridge, but we've just ditched Oxford in preference for Cambridge. I'm not sure, we're not making any great statements, I mean, but there you go. So Emma, you're in Cambridge. And you went to Cambridge originally to study, didn't you? That's how you kind of ended up there and got stuck there. Is that right?
Yeah, I did natural sciences as an undergrad. Came up to uni in 2015 and I've been here ever since.
Okay. I used to live in a place called Bournemouth, and they used to say that Bournemouth was the graveyard of ambition because once you got there, you never wanted to go anywhere else. So maybe Cambridge is like the same. You know, you get there and you get stuck.
Oh, it's too beautiful a place to live. It's very hard to ever think of living anywhere else when Cambridge is so beautiful.
I know, but you don't have hills. It's just flat. It's really boring.
Oh, I love flat. I grew up in Suffolk where it's very flat, so I just can't deal with hills. There's one hill in Cambridge I occasionally have to cycle up and I just can't hack it. It's too hard.
There's a hill in Cambridge?
One hill. It's called Castle Hill.
Yeah. Anyway, so you're in Cambridge. You said you went to Cambridge eventually to study natural sciences, and then you specialised in what?
Biochemistry.
Biochemistry. Okay. Why did you end up deciding to study the natural sciences? Were you kind of particularly inspired by something to do that, or was it just like you kind of eeny meeny miny mo pick whatever?
Yeah, sure. I think as a kid I just fell in love with the natural world and studying it. I think probably if you're studying science, on every science student's personal statement, it opens with some kind of line about how when I was 10 years old, I first realized the wonder of studying the natural world by watching David Attenborough or whatever it was, because nature is stunning. So my field particularly is biochemistry, kind of the biology of what's going on within your cells on like a molecular level. And it just blows my mind. Well, blew my mind when I was applying, still does, that there is this whole world going on a molecular level in our bodies all the time. We just have no idea about. But there's so much to learn. I think, that totally blows my mind. It's so, so beautiful, and have loved being able to study it.
Yeah. I didn't warn you about this question, but now I'm just intrigued. Is there like a kind of fascinating, like sometimes you just like, there are little things that blow your mind. Have you got any fascinating facts for us that you think like, I just love that kind of thought or
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite thing in biochemistry, I think, is the bacterial flagellum. So they're these little tails that bacteria have that let them swim around. And they're made up of like all these different tiny protein subunits. It's like 20 nanometers across. It's so tiny. And the really cool thing is that if it turns in one direction, the bacteria go in straight lines. And if they rotate it and spin it in the other direction, they go all over the place. And that means that bacteria can kind of follow gradients or like smell stuff basically and follow a smell by just like turning their tail one way or the other. And it's so cool.
That is amazing. And how big did you say they are?
20 nanometers across. So imagine a meter, a centimeter, like a micrometer, a nanometer, tiny.
Wow. Amazing. So when you start to kind of think of the intricacy of like our bodies, how the things work, it does blow our mind. So yeah, so you said you got inspired by that, obviously took you to Cambridge, started studying the natural sciences, but you're also a Christian, and currently you support and work with Christian university students, not just in Cambridge but anywhere in the UK. Did you find, like, what kind of reaction did you find kind of going to university, studying natural sciences, but also being quite open about the fact that you're a Christian? How do people react to that? What did you find in terms of, was there a range of reactions, and what do people say?
Yeah, a couple of different main responses, I think. So there may be one group of people who really didn't like the fact that I was a Christian and studied science. Maybe wouldn't be rude about it to my face, but certainly some of the things they were posting on Facebook and articles they were sharing made me think, you do not like that I am a Christian and also do science. One friend gave me a copy one time of Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, which was a very interesting read, actually. So I was grateful for it, but was very clear about what he thought about what I believed. I think the other group of people, and probably the larger group, were people who'd be pretty like interested to hear about, my Christian faith, but would very much say, you do you, that's great for you. I don't feel like I have any like need to be interested in that, but it's great that you can have your faith over here and I'll believe what I believe over here, and that's fine. We can do science together, but let's just not mix what we believe into that. I guess an example would maybe be in my third year. The head of the biochemistry department in the very first lecture of my third year said in this first lecture, there's no room for God in this course. Not necessarily saying you can't be a Christian, just we don't talk about God here. We keep our faith and our science very separate. So yeah, those are kind of the main responses, I guess, that I got.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So the kind of the hostile reaction that's like, you just can't believe that rubbish. And then maybe a slightly more empathetic reaction, which is just, well, that's nice for you, but it doesn't really involve kind of the objective things in regards to, say, science. So taking the first then reaction, like how kind of would you react to, like for instance, your friend who's like, pushing your Christopher Hitchens books and hostile towards this idea that like, how could a Christian even like how could an intelligent woman like you entertain the idea of believing God? Like, how can you put those two things together? What would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, I guess if we look back at history, the idea that there's kind of a conflict between science and religious belief is really quite a recent one. You look back to all the founders of science, people like Galileo and Copernicus and Newton and Francis Bacon, these people who are really pioneering modern science way back at the start of the scientific revolution. And all of them, nearly every single one, was a firm believer in God. And it wasn't just that was incidental to the fact they did science. Actually, that was the reason they were doing science. Science itself stemmed out of this belief that there was a creator God who had created the universe in a structured and ordered way, and given humans rational brains that were able to understand it. That's why people started doing science. So this idea that science and religion would be incompatible was definitely a much later thing, and certainly is not how the pioneers of science would have understood what they were doing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So that might be kind of something you could say to someone who's hostile, but you're saying actually the kind of predominant reaction, and certainly this has been my experience chatting with people particularly more recently, I'd say, is kind of to say, well, it's nice for you, Emma. Really, really happy that you've got this kind of God stuff going on in your life. Like, keep that to yourself, but don't like let that affect how you think about, like, you know, stuff like science. I mean, like, we're dealing with objective stuff over here. Nice, you've got kind of subjective feelings that make you feel better. So, how do you go about then responding to that? Like, I assume you obviously don't agree with that, but why not? And what would you say?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I see why it's an attractive way to see the world, I guess. Like the idea that we can all have our kind of own independent belief systems, but still collaborate on science, which is objective. It's a really nice thought, and it is attractive, but it's just not satisfying at the same time. I think that kind of view of separating your facts and your values, your science and your beliefs, requires you to have a belief system that makes really no claims on objective truth, that's entirely subjective. And I personally don't want to totally give up my scientific mind, my scientific brain, when I think about what I believe. And certainly Christianity does make claim to objective truth. Either there is a God or there isn't. That isn't actually a subjective thing. Either Jesus lived and died and rose again in recorded history, or he didn't. That again is an objective claim. So yeah, like it makes me sad to think that we'd be trying to separate those things when actually like a full rounded worldview gets to apply the same principles of looking for evidence and coming to reasonable conclusions, both to science and to making conclusions about God and more spiritual things.
That's great. So how would you say then, like as a Christian, being a Christian changes, well, does it change the way you do science? I mean, like obviously kind of doesn't change the kind of results you're going to get if you're doing a scientific experiment, but how does it change your approach to it and the way you think about it?
Yeah, so it definitely doesn't change, the experiments you do, the results that you get. Being Christian isn't going to make you a better scientist in terms of publishing better papers necessarily. It certainly changes your attitude to how you go about science, the reasons that you're wanting to do science for. Is it just about kind of climbing up the career ladder and getting papers published in better and better journals? Or is your science actually about serving people and doing good in the world using the scientific capacities that you have? And it's such a joy doing science as a Christian. That's what I believe science was designed for, not just as something we would go off and do on our own, but getting to explore God's world with him in relationship with our creator is just the most wonderful thing. Kind of like when you're a kid and you are like baking with your mum or with your granny, or like doing some gardening with your dad or whatever it is. Getting to explore those things, create and build and design in relationship with a parent, with someone who loves you. And to do that with the creator of the universe is just incredible. I know if you do science, if you've ever watched David Attenborough or ever looked at the night sky, we get that incredible feeling of wonder and awe, don't we? And it feels like there is lots to be thankful for about that. But sometimes if we don't have a God, we miss out on who to be thankful to. And that experience of being able to be thankful to the one who designed and made all of it, it's just a massive joy. I love being able to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, some people will say, well, I'm really pleased for you, Emma. Like that's great. You know, you've got that. But personally, like I don't go with that. And I'm happy just to continue looking at science as an atheist. Like, lots of scientists are atheists. They don't kind of bring God into it. And I'm kind of happy with my position. So do we just agree to disagree, or what would you say to that? Would you say that being a Christian isn't just another way of looking at science, but would you want to say more fundamentally that it's got something to offer that is different to anything else?
Yeah. So when you do science, in reality, you are living as a Christian. You're using a Christian view of the world when you do science. Even if you, would say that you're an atheist in the way you approach that. In reality, like I was saying, the foundation of science came out of believing that the world is structured, that it was created by a consistent eternal God who gives laws into nature. And the very empirical nature of science comes from this belief that human reason isn't perfect, and we need to do unbiased, repeatable, like blind experiments to be able to really understand the world. Like that, like it or not, that comes from a Christian view of the world. So when you do science, you are acting as a Christian, whether you think you are or not. And there is such a rich and beautiful view of the world to be gained by both doing science and knowing God, and doing those together. If you are living as a scientist, if you're a science student, you're thinking about science, and you don't know the creator who made it all, you are so missing out intellectually, and not having this more complete, fuller view of the world that integrates both knowledge on a scientific level and knowledge on a theological, philosophical level. And you're missing out relationally. Like, you could be having this incredible knowledge of God and doing science along with him. And if that's you, if you're here and you're a science student and you really don't know Jesus, you're missing out. And I would love to, and for you to get to know more about what doing science along with Jesus looks like.
That sounds great. But I guess one reaction might be to say, yeah, but if it is so great and like it sounds, you're very excited about it, why are there so many people who are obviously, top level scientists, clearly don't believe in God? And like we said at the beginning, some quite antagonistic. Why? Where do you think that comes from? If it's not, if you're saying like it's quite intellectually compatible to be a Christian, in fact, more than compatible, it gives the best basis for understanding God. Why is it then that lots of people still disregard God? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess you could ask that about any discipline, couldn't you, really? Why are there so many artists or musicians or politicians who disregard God? I don't think it's unique to the sciences. And actually, one of the wonderful things about science is that it does, in some sense, operate on this human system. It's an exploration of the natural world, and therefore we don't need to kind of invoke supernatural explanations to explain things that go on in science, which means that it is quite possible to live just in this world where you don't look beyond that bubble of what science can explain, whilst at the same time kind of taking for granted that things like love and justice and beauty are real, like genuine qualities in the world, not just artifacts of science or psychology or molecules in our brains moving around. So I think probably most people in that situation are living within a bit of a tension where you'd express that science is all there is, the natural world is all there is, while still believing in human rights and love and beauty and truth. And I'm just not sure those two worldviews are compatible.
Brilliant. Emma, thank you so much. It's been great hearing a bit from you. Now, you're going to be sticking around, aren't you? Because later on, there's going to be an opportunity to ask Emma questions. You can be doing that already as we go through the evening. So if anything that Emma's already said has kind of provoked questions, maybe you disagree, maybe you want to kind of go into more detail on something or to clarify something, or if you're just thinking, I could do a much better job of asking Emma questions than Michael, then you can. You can ask questions at the end and we'll come back to you. So thank you so much. We're going to pause there with Emma, and we're going to have a little break to hear some music, and we're going to hear someone else's story in a moment to give us a chance to reflect on what we've heard so far this evening before we go on to think about this whole subject of science in a little bit more detail in a moment.
I hope you've been enjoying the big conversations that we've been having so far. I know that I have. We're now going to have a bit of music. I met you in the dark, you lit me up, you made me feel as though I wasn't enough. We danced the night away, we checked the and smiled on my shoulder. For a minute, I was starting over. You pull me closer to your chest. And you asked me to stay over. I said I already told you. I think that you should get some rest. I knew I loved you then, but you never know. 'Cause I played it cool and I was scared of letting go. And I knew I needed you, but I never showed. But I wanna stay with you until we're great and old. Just say you won't let go. Just say you won't let go. I'll wake you up with some breakfast in bed. I'll bring you coffee with a kiss on your head. And I'll take the kids to school, wave them goodbye. And I'll thank my lucky stars for that night. When you looked over your shoulder, for a minute I forget that I'm older. I wanna dance with you right now. And you look from the zipper, I swear we can get better. You make me feel this way somehow. And I'm so in love with you, and I hope you know, darling, your love is more than worth its weight in gold. We've come so far, my dear, look how we've grown. And I wanna stay with you until we're great and old. Just say you won't let go. Just say you won't let go. And I wanna live with you, even where it goes. 'Cause you were always there for me when I needed you the most. And I'm gonna love you till my lungs give out. And I promise to death we part like an old vow. So I wrote this song for you now. Everyone knows that it's just you and me until we're great and old. Just say you won't let go. 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 Just say you won't let go.
I'm James and I study medicine here at Southampton Uni. I knew about God and prayed to God since I was little, but I never understood what relevance the Bible had to my life. I guess I thought it was just full of stories that were fun to read in Sunday Club. I only realised the true relevance of these stories to my life when I went to a week-long camp in the summer after year 6. I was told about Jesus and why he was sent to the cross to die in such a horrible way. Because the punishment for my sin is death. I deserved death for the sin I committed and continue to commit, but Jesus took that spot for me. He died in my place on that cross so that I could be forgiven and have eternal life. One thing that makes Jesus so relevant to me is the individuality he treats me with and others. I live in a world with over 7 billion other people. To me, that is a huge number of people. When Jesus was walking through a town called Jericho, surrounded by crowds and crowds of people, a man named Zacchaeus wanted to see him, so he climbed a tree. As Jesus walked past him, he looked directly at him and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately." Jesus called him by name. In a world where 7 billion other people live, Jesus called me by name, just like Zacchaeus. And he knows each of us individually. He says, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." How amazing that he knows each of us and loves us enough to lay down his life for us. I'll admit that I've had doubts in the past. Isn't the Bible outdated? Wasn't it written thousands of years ago? Doesn't science prove God doesn't exist? For me, I needed evidence. I really became persuaded when I looked at the evidence for the Bible. It's a reliable document, accurately recorded and transmitted through history. Physical evidence shows that the records of the New Testament are incredibly accurate. Archaeological evidence proves again and again that the Bible corresponds to historical reality. 4 men separately wrote an account of Jesus' life, death and resurrection. In writing and proclaiming this, they were willing to die. Why would they be willing to die if they didn't believe it as truth? As someone who studies a science and bases what I learn and believe on evidence, this has really helped me. And I believe science proves, and again, even more so, that God exists and created me. I've only been studying medicine for 4 months, and each online lecture I watch, I become more and more convinced that my body was not put on this earth by chance. I find it impossible to believe that. I think everyone secretly knows that we aren't here by chance. I accepted Christ's gift of freedom from my sins, and it was, and always will be, the best gift I've ever received.
I have come to this place in my life. I'm full, but I'm not satisfied. This longing to have more of you, and I can feel it. My heart is convinced I'm thirsty. My soul can't be quenched. You already know this, but still come do whatever you want to. I'm standing needy, but I'm out where I've never been. And I feel you coming, and I hear your voice in the wind. Would you come and tear down the boxes that I have tried to put you in, and let love come teach me who you are again? Would you take me back to the place where my heart was only about you, and all I wanted was just to be with you? Come do whatever you want to. And further, my heart moves away from the shore. Whatever it looks like, whatever may come, I am yours. Further, my heart moves away from the shore. Thanks for having me. I'll be passing back to Michael now.
Already, haven't we, this evening? And as we said a minute ago, we would love to hear your questions later on, and Emma and I will be taking your questions. So just go to suku.uk/questions and you'll be taken straight to a page where you can ask questions, but you can also see other people's questions. And so if you can't think of a question, you can vote other people's questions to the top, which gives them more likelihood of being asked. I'm afraid if you don't think that's a good question, you can't vote it down. You can just think of a better one and hope that one beats it. But do be sending your questions in, which we'll be looking at together a little bit later. But this whole evening, we're thinking about this question: does religion provide any truth in a scientific world? And as we heard from Emma just a few minutes before, some people kind of see religion and God and the Christian faith as pretty much irrelevant when it comes to the world in which we live today. When we have life's big questions, we think it's science that will give us the answers. When we face life's great problems, we figure it's basically science that's going to solve them. And we see that in the way that we've responded in a great way to the pandemic, don't we? We don't look to God, but we look to science to find vaccines to get us out of the mess that we're in. Isn't religion a bit irrelevant? What's it got to do with life today, you might be asking? And the reason why many people think that is because we have this kind of story of history. It goes something like this. Long, long ago, far, far away, there were people who were amazed at what the world was like. Those stars up in the sky, the awesomeness of the mountains, the power of a thunderstorm, they blew their minds because they couldn't understand how those stars got there or why thunder and lightning would happen as it does. And so they came up with an idea. Maybe there are these gods, and these gods will do the things that we don't understand. And so they attributed to all of the lack of knowledge they had, God. But you might be thinking, well, of course, what happened a little bit later on is that scientists came along and they discovered that it wasn't God that made thunder and lightning. It wasn't God that made the mountains. It was natural processes that brought about these wonderful things that we can see today. So we don't need God anymore because now we have science that answers the things that we don't know. And that's a common idea, a common understanding of history. It's certainly an idea put forward by Stephen Hawking, the late great physicist, in his last book, The Grand Design. And he said this. He said, "Ignorance of nature's ways led people in ancient times to invent gods. We don't know how it works. God did it. And that'll solve the problem, won't it?" Now, of course, if that's how you view the role of God, to do the things that we don't understand, the more we understand, and boy, does science explain more and more every day, the more we understand, the less we need God. And you might extrapolate to the future and assume that there'll be a day when ultimately there's no need for God at all because we've understood everything. At least in theory, every question will be answered, every problem will be solved. No need for God anymore. And you can understand, if that was the case, why that would be an insufficient view of God. There's a lovely cartoon in Stephen Hawking's book, and it's got this guy trying to do a science experiment or show his working of a science experiment on a blackboard. And he goes along, but he gets a bit stuck halfway along. And so he just writes, "And then a miracle occurred." And we're kind of thinking, like, that's a little bit lazy, like just attributing the stuff that we don't understand to God. No, we want to be driven back to understand our world more fully and more deeply. Let's get rid of God, and science will give us the answers. And so often this view of God is what might be called, in a kind of derogatory way, a God of the gaps, a God to explain the gaps of our scientific knowledge so that now ultimately we don't need to bother with science. And we say, well, actually, let's bother with science and let's not need God. How do we respond to that? Is there a response to that? Well, the first thing that's worth pointing out is that actually, although that's a really popular retelling of how science and God have interacted through history, it doesn't actually bear out in the reality of what's always happened. For instance, is it true that whenever we have not understood something, we've always attributed it to God? Well, actually, that's just not the case. Fascinating fact, until recently, even the greatest minds in our world didn't know why there were holes in Swiss cheese. Okay, it was like this great cheesy mystery why holes were in Swiss cheese. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is no one in the world that was attributing the formation of holes in Swiss cheese to some kind of cheese god who did the cheese thing that we don't understand. Like, people didn't do that. They just said, we don't know. So it's just not true to say that when people didn't understand stuff, they always attributed it to God. Sometimes people were just happy to say, we don't know. But actually, what I want to say more than that is, if we're going to stick God in the gaps, we're actually putting God in the wrong place anyway. We're looking for him in the wrong location. Let me try and illustrate. I remember a few years ago when the Dyson air blades, you know, those hand dryers that you get in public toilets, the Dyson air blades were first introduced. And it was a very exciting day because I'm old enough to remember kind of pre-Dyson air blade hand dryers in public toilets, and they were really inefficient. In fact, like, they basically didn't dry your hands at all. It was just this kind of like protocol that you would go through when you went to the toilet. It would be like, I'll just stand there for 30 seconds, redistribute the water around my hands, and it will all get blown down my sleeves, and I'll come out and then have to dry them on my trousers anyway. But the Dyson Airblade changed all of that, didn't it? Now we had a hand dryer that actually did dry your hands in like 10 seconds, I think it was claimed. In fact, I remember the first time I used one, I dried my hands twice just to work out whether it really could do it within 10 seconds and got the average score. It was correct. Anyway, imagine I'm looking at this Airblade in my enthusiasm for its wonderful technology, and I think to myself, I wonder how this can work so efficiently. How could this machine be so efficient at drying my hands? I just don't understand how it could work. And then I notice on the side, it has this name, Dyson. And so I think, well, maybe there's a man called Mr. Dyson. And maybe he lives inside this Airblade. And maybe whenever he hears the sound of the toilet being flushed, he jumps into action. And then, as I place my hands within the machine, he runs along very fast, blowing really hard upon my hands. That's why it works. This little man, Mr. Dyson, does the stuff I don't understand. And so I get my screwdriver, I isolate it from the mains, and I take the cover off the Airblade, and I look inside and I find there is no Mr. Dyson. There's just motors and electronics and some stuff I don't understand, but no Mr. Dyson. So I then conclude, well, there is therefore no such person as Mr. Dyson. I know how a Dyson Airblade works. I've seen the workings. There is no need for Mr. Dyson. But of course, there is a need for Mr. Dyson, isn't there? And Mr. Dyson does indeed exist. He doesn't, though, live inside the Airblade. He lives, apparently, last time I checked, in California. And he has a lot of money because he has sold a lot of Airblades and vacuum cleaners. You see, Mr. Dyson isn't in the Airblade doing the stuff we don't understand. Mr. Dyson is the inventor of the Airblade. He stands outside of the thing that he created and is responsible for it. And understanding the inner workings doesn't remove the need for him to be there in the first place. It's the same when it comes to God. You see, the Christian faith, at least, doesn't claim that God is a God of the gaps, a God who does the things that we don't understand. But the Christian claim is that God is a God of the whole show. He created the whole thing. And understanding how it works doesn't remove the need for God in the first place. That faith, God, and science are not competing explanations, but complementary ones, depending on the kind of questions that we're asking about our world. And that's why true Christian faith is not threatened by increased scientific knowledge. It's not as if, like, now we've got all these answers, we don't need God anymore. Interestingly, that's been borne out in the reality of history. Think of someone like Isaac Newton, you know. He discovered that you shouldn't sit under trees, apple trees at least, and he discovered how gravity works. And so he writes Principia Mathematica, this incredible textbook. And in the introduction to Principia Mathematica, he basically spends the whole time saying, now I've discovered something of gravity. I am just amazed at who God is. His increased understanding of science led to an increased understanding of the God behind it all. It led to worship, not to atheism. It's incredible. And the same is true today. Francis Collins, who was the director of the Human Genome Project, talks about how being a Christian fills him with an even greater sense of wonder as he looks at the intricacy of our world, because he knows the God that's behind it all. It's incredible. Because when you think about our world, and Emma picked up on this a bit earlier in the interview, it is amazing, isn't it? Here's two facts that just blow my mind. Number one, light. It takes light 1.5 seconds to get from the moon to Earth. It takes light 8.3 minutes to get from the sun to the Earth. But it takes light 100,000 years to travel across our small galaxy, the Milky Way. And our galaxy is one of 100 billion that we know of in the observable universe. Like, when I hear that, I think, gosh, this universe is big. But then as we thought about, isn't it intricate? Isn't it so intricate? I've got a glass of water here. If I were to take a swig of this water, how much water have I actually drunk? How much water in terms of the water molecules have I just drunk? Well, approximately, because you can't do these things exactly, I've just drunk 6 to 10 to the power 23 molecules of H2O into my body. Now, that's a big number. It's hard to try and comprehend or imagine how big that number is. So how big is that number of water molecules that I've just ingested into my system? Well, let's imagine we could take each water molecule and put them in a little square, 1 millimeter square, okay? 1 molecule in each. And then we were to place those in a row on a road. How long would that road have to be to Well, it would have to reach from here to the moon. But not only is that how long it would need to be, but also how wide would it need to be? Well, it would need to be 4 times wider than it is long. That's incredible, isn't it? When we think of the intricacy, the magnitude of the universe. And if you think, if that's how amazing, how awesome our world is, if there was a God that stands behind it, how much more incredible might he be? He's not a God of the gaps. He's a God of the whole show. And as we understand more and more of how our world works and understand it more deeply, it should, if we know that there's a God behind it, make us incredibly grateful and incredibly awestruck. Now, just before I finish, let me read to you just a few verses from a book that comes in the second part of the Bible. And this is what we call the New Testament. And it's one of the biographical accounts of the life of Jesus. And this describes to us who God is and how we could also know him. It's the fourth of those accounts of Jesus' life, a book called John. And John writes this book and he begins it by saying this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. So John begins not by describing this God of the gaps, in the beginning was the Word who did the stuff that we didn't yet understand. No, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and everything that exists was created by him, for him, and through him. This Word stands behind everything. He's the God of the whole show. But how would we ever know that God? I mean, if God isn't just like hiding behind a distant galaxy doing some kind of complex equations, but if he's the God of the whole show, if he's outside of the universe, outside of space and time, how could we as finite matters in his creation ever discover him or know about him? That's a good question, isn't it? But then John makes this incredible claim just a few sentences later. He says, the Word, this Word, the God of the whole show, the God who made everything, became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. John says this Word, this God of the whole show, has stepped into human history as a human being, and we've seen him. And then he goes on in the rest of his book to tell us about this man. We call him Jesus. See, this is the claim of Christianity, that the God of the whole show didn't stay outside of space and time and leave us kind of guessing about whether he might exist in philosophical debates that go on for years, but he steps into human history and makes himself known. So if you want to know whether God is there, don't just get hung up on kind of theoretical conversations about the beginning of the universe. Look at the person of Jesus. Ask questions. Did this man really live? Did he really die? And did he really rise from the dead? That central claim of the Christian faith. Because it's based on objective historical facts. And you need to check it out for yourself. And we'd encourage you to do that, to ask your questions, to chat with your friends, to get in touch, and to look at that this week. But just before we finish, you might be saying, well, why? Why would God do that? I mean, like, if God was just wanting to convince us that he existed, there are lots of ways that he could do that. He could write it in the sky, in clouds, although that'd be kind of hard in Britain because, it's all clouds. So maybe he'd have to write it in like gaps in the clouds. That would be more efficient. Or maybe he could write it in the stars. He could do all sorts of things. He could kind of set up a global Zoom meeting for us all to join, or he could just Zoom bomb these meetings. Like God could reveal himself in lots of ways. And yet the Bible says that God has revealed himself by getting born into human history 2,000 years ago, 2,000 miles away. Why? Well, just 2 sentences before that last verse that I read, we're told why. John writes this: to all who received him, who received Jesus, to all who received him, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor a husband's will, but born of God. So John says, actually, why did God come into human history? Why did he reveal himself? Not just so we could tick the box that says, does God exist? Yes or no. But so we could know this God personally, so that we could come to have a relationship with him that would be as real as a family that we're born into. But not a physical relationship, but a spiritual one. But a real connection with the God who's made us. A real understanding of why we're here. A real understanding of where we've come from. And a wonderful hope of where we're going in the future. Jesus wants to give us all of those things. And this isn't redundant. This isn't irrelevant. This is massively relevant and massively important to all of us. But listen, we're going to have some questions later on, and we're going to discuss this further. But I'm going to hand back to our hosts now, and you'll be hearing from Emma and me a little bit later on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma and Michael, for all that you've shared with us this evening. It's been so interesting to hear what you guys have had to say.
Yeah, Emma, I loved what you were saying about how you find it such a joy to do science as a Christian, and that it's not a contradiction, but that it so goes together.
Yeah, and for me, not a scientist, it's really eye-opening to hear what you were saying about how if you are a scientist and you don't know God, that you're really missing out, because it's made me feel like I'm missing out, not being able to appreciate all that God's created.
And yeah, Michael, just one thing that I took from yours was that how you were saying that true Christian faith is not threatened by increased scientific knowledge. Yeah, so what a great thing that is.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, as well. And we're so excited to have you with us for the whole week.
So now it's time, as I was saying, we can have a discussion with others. You can call someone from CU, and a group of you can come together, talk with your housemates, and discuss what you thought from tonight.
Yeah, or if you don't have someone that invited you along, please come join us. We'll be on a Zoom call. The link will be going into the chat. And yeah, we'd love to see you.
So do be coming up with questions that you have, thinking ones that you really want to know the answers to, and then you can send them into the Slido link, which will also be in the chat.
Yeah, and then we'll be picking some of them out, and Emma and Michael will be coming to answer them. So if you ask them in your rooms and the people don't know the answers, don't worry, bring them on over here.
And hopefully we'll have some answers to your questions.
Yeah, and we'll see you soon.
Oh, my excuse, that company. Wonderful. Wonderful. I hope you guys had a good time discussing in your groups on the calls. You were able to come up with some really good questions. We've seen them coming through, and yeah,
keep sending them in.
Yeah, definitely some good ones there. So we'll just start with the first question, which is, could there be any scientific, in brackets, not historical, discovery which could be incompatible with your faith? E.g., if there was evidence that free will doesn't exist. So yeah, Emma and Michael,
over to you.
I've been sat here while you guys have been discussing, reading that question, trying to wrap my brains, think, is there anything that could come up? I couldn't come up with anything. I think, going back to what Michael was saying about we have a God who's not a God of the gaps, but a God of the whole show. If he's God of the whole show, then kind of whatever could be discovered within that show, like I'm pretty confident that he's God of that as well. Yeah, I don't want to be too dogmatic about definitely there's never anything that could come up. I'd want to be, yeah, open to questioning things and reassessing in light of new evidence. But I can't, imagine there being much that could come up that would make me question that. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interesting question because, like, the question of free will does come up in terms of the fact that quite a few people would say, well, we are just determined. You know, ultimately, you could basically predict all human behavior on the basis of two things, kind of our environment or our DNA, you know, our upbringing and the situation that we're placed in. And we are responding basically almost robotically to what's happening around us. But actually, we come to that conclusion not so much from the evidence of science, but from the presupposition that makes us look at the science in a certain way. So if our presupposition is we live in a closed universe and there is no God and nothing beyond the material, then we have to explain everything by means of a material explanation. And therefore you do become a reductionist, which is why, consistently speaking, if you're going to get rid of God, it's very hard to think about the idea of having free will. But of course, if we don't really believe in free will, that has lots of problems for not just how we think about, for instance, our legal system, but also how we think about love. So I would say the problem isn't so much from science very often, it's from the presupposition behind the science. We come to a discovery and we say, well, this disproves God. And I'm like, no, like you've already assumed no God when you've looked at the science. But actually, if we bear in mind that there could be a God, there'd be a different way of looking at this.
Wow, such good answers.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
So much, yeah. Okay, this is another one from the Slido. How can you believe in God alongside scientific principles such as evolution and the Big Bang?
Yeah, great. I can start. As we've talked already, haven't we, about how there are kind of different levels of explanation. Science is maybe one level of explanation of things that happen in the world. A kind of theological God explanation would be just a different kind of level. I think I like to think about it as a bit like Google Maps. You know how on Google Maps you can have like the road map and the terrain map.
Yeah.
Skew when you like layer them on top of one another. Usually it makes sense to not have them together so you can see a bit more clearly what's going on and look at them independently. But they're not they're totally complementary to each other. They're not contradicting. They're just kind of different levels of information. And I guess a kind of scientific principle about how things came to be and a theological Bible explanation about how things came to be are maybe like those two different levels on Google Maps that map on top of one another. I think like people believe different things when it comes to things like evolution, but yeah, I think the Bible's very concerned with why things have happened, with the fact that God has created, and slightly less concerned with the mechanism. Science is very concerned with the mechanism, but not particularly concerned about who did it or why. I'm going to say on something like the Big Bang. Before the Big Bang theory was kind of put together in the last century, the prevailing theory was that actually the universe had no beginning, that it just always had been, matter had always existed. And that really did seem to contradict with a Christian worldview, which says that God created, there was a start to the universe. And one of the reasons it took a long time for the Big Bang to be accepted was because lots of atheist scientists said, this is basically accepting Christianity to say that the world had a beginning, and we don't like that. So yeah, something like the Big Bang, in fact, I think leans more towards a Christian perspective than it would do towards an atheist perspective.
And just to add to that, it's fascinating. We were talking about this idea of a kind of God of the gaps, as if like we've got all these gaps in our scientific knowledge, and then they get smaller and smaller, and so there's no space for God. But actually, what you could say is that science actually creates gaps that weren't there before. So, for instance, that's fantastic. Before Georges Lemaitre theorized about the Big Bang, people could have just said, well, the universe has always existed. We don't need to have a kind of first cause or anything like that. It was like increased scientific knowledge that actually creates more questions, not less questions. But they're a question of a different nature. They're not just how does this work, but what stands behind all of this.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Emma and Michael. I feel like that's often a question that I have as well about that stuff. So glad to have some answers. Another question that we've got is, why believe in healing miracles when we can explain medicine and the body?
Yeah, and we've had another one about miracles as well. How can you believe in miracles and science? You guys might want to merge those ones or answer them separately, up to you. But
do you want me to kick off?
Yeah, go for Michael.
Okay, second. Well, I guess there's a couple of questions there, and they are obviously kind of related, but also slightly different. In terms of miracles, we're going to look at that a little bit later in the week. So there will be a talk where we look at that in more detail if you want to come back. Because obviously it's a common objection that basically if you opened up the door for miracles, then you'd have to basically kind of throw out the laws of nature. And I remember chatting to someone once, and he's like, well, I couldn't believe in the resurrection because things like that don't happen every day. And I was like, well, that's the point. They don't. If they did, it would just be a normal occurrence. So miracles by definition are things that don't normally happen, and also things that cannot be explained by naturalistic means. If they were not those things, it wouldn't be a miracle. Now, does it mean that we have to therefore throw out the laws of nature? Well, I'd say the laws of nature tell us what normally happen given no outside interference in any situation. But if the God who created the laws of nature actually at certain points in space and time chose to intervene so that what normally happens doesn't happen in that instance, doesn't mean that we throw out the laws of nature. We just say actually someone's interfered, and it might want to ask us questions as to why he interfered at that point in that place, because miracles, and even in the Bible, are not happening kind of with equal frequency and distribution throughout the 1,000-year or so period of the Bible being written. It seems to be clustered around significant events and moments in history. And that, I think, helps us when it comes to questions of healing, because I think I'm convinced that God is able to heal, and we see in the life and teaching and the example of Jesus God's power to do that. So I don't believe those are fables or fairy tales. I believe they're historical documents that can be backed up historically. But at the same time, my experience is that normally when friends and family get sick, miraculous healing of the scale that we see in the Gospels doesn't seem to happen. I'm not saying it couldn't or it never does, but normally it doesn't seem to happen now. It doesn't mean that it can't, but I just think actually maybe the miracles and the healings that we saw in the Bible were not necessarily there to lead us to think that they will always happen now, but they are in a way, according to the Bible, a snapshot of what the ultimate future might be like when Jesus is fully king and his kingdom fully comes. So he points us towards a day when actually healing will fully happen. So the question I always have as a Christian is not, does God heal? I think he does. It's just, when does God heal? And sometimes I think God can intervene now in our world in miraculous ways. Often he doesn't. But as a Christian, I look forward to an ultimate day when he will, when there'll be no more sickness, there'll be no more death. And that's what the ministry of Jesus was pointing towards.
Yeah, I think maybe just add a tiny thing to that. An important thing as a scientist when you come to a problem or a question is not coming with presuppositions necessarily that you've kind of decided, oh, it must have been like that. To actually come to something like the resurrection, having pre-decided that can't happen, therefore I know it didn't, is not really a very scientific way of thinking. The scientist asks questions and reasons the best explanation, doesn't write things off from the beginning, having decided they just can't happen. So much science would have been held back if people had thought, oh, that can't happen, it can't be true. Think about quantum mechanics. It defies all kind of common sense, really. And yet it seems that is the best explanation for things that are going on. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to come to something like the resurrection, the miracles, not thinking, I'm totally closed to the idea of this really having happened. But having an open mind, being ready to follow the evidence where it leads.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Emma and Michael, again. Such good questions, but then such good answers.
Amazing answers. Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, there's another one here. Could science ever replace religion? What are your thoughts on that one?
Emma, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by the question, doesn't it? Can science ever replace religion? I guess in a sense it has for some people. There certainly is what you could call a religion, a belief system worldview called scientism, which is basically the belief that science and the natural world is all there is, that science can't explain everything. And that's not something that flows directly out of science. That is a philosophical position. A worldview, I guess, that says, there is nothing other than the natural world, which comes from, I guess, making science your religion. But that is not, as I say, not a direct flow out of science. That is a separate kind of worldview that you come to. Michael, do you want to answer that?
No, I think that's really helpful. I think, when it comes to getting rid of religion, it also depends what you mean by religion. If your religion has got gaps, like we've talked about tonight, then yeah, absolutely. If your explanation for religion is it's just doing the stuff that I can't yet understand, then there could be a very real way in which science would replace it. But if your understanding of God is the God of Jesus, who created the universe, the God of the whole show, who stepped into space and time in the person of Christ, then I don't think it will, because actually we see that they're complementary and they work together in that way.
That's such a good point, about some people have already made science their religion, and yeah, such helpful answers.
So I think, have we got time for just one more?
Yeah, let's do a final question.
So the question is, rising conspiracy theories seems to show our gullibility as a human race. Why is belief in the Christian God not just believing what you want to be true?
Oh, that cuts both ways, doesn't it? You can say believing in the Christian God might be just believing what you want to be true, if that's what you choose to want to believe. But if actually you'd really rather not believe in a God, you'd rather believe there is nothing facing you after death, that you won't be held accountable for your actions, it becomes quite convenient to believe that the Christian God isn't true. So yeah, maybe this could be an argument leveled against atheism as well. Is that not just a convenient thing to believe, if you would rather not be held accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to say on top of that as well, there's an interesting thing when people look at Christianity, they sometimes say, I can understand how, the idea of a God who created us, who we could relate to, who will one day restore the world. I can understand how that's attractive. I can understand how that meets your kind of emotional needs and your desires. And therefore it can't be true. Okay. Because you want it to be true, it just can't be true. And I think, well, actually, it can be the fact that we invent stuff that we want to be true that isn't. But it doesn't mean that just because I want something or desire something, it's not true. Because actually in life, we have all sorts of desires that do relate to objective reality. I get thirsty, and there is such a thing as water. I get hungry, there is such a thing as food. People feel sexual desire, there is such a thing as sex, and so on. So in so many ways, our desires point towards some kind of real objective reality that could be out there. And then I look around the world and I say that there's never been a culture anywhere in the world that's been completely atheistic. I mean, they tried it. I've been to Albania, that was announced itself atheistic during communist times. But ultimately, it failed, because there seems to be this deep-seated, ingrained desire in each one of us to believe in some kind of supernatural. And I want to say, is this universal desire for the supernatural the only universal desire that doesn't correspond to reality? Or is it the fact that actually our desires are explained in the fact that there is something beyond us, that we were created to connect to this God, and that actually disconnected from God, they'll always feel like there's something missing, because there is. And that's not just some kind of psychological crutch, but it's because that's the way we were meant to live. And the Christian faith would say that is the way we're meant to live. We're meant to be connected to the source of light and life. And the problem is we're not, because by nature, all of us have turned away from him. We're not the people we should be. And because of that, we don't enjoy this ongoing and intimate relationship that we could. And that's the beauty of Christian faith, because it says that actually we can have that back in Jesus. We can have that relationship restored. We can come to know this God. And that does meet our deepest desires in a wonderful way. But as I always want to say, Christianity is not too good to be true. Christianity is good because it is true. It is based on objective reality. It's not just meeting my emotional needs. It is based on historical facts. But it's not just an interesting fact of history. It really does meet our deepest needs emotionally, psychologically, and relationally. And that's why it's so wonderful.
Wow, that's such a good quote. Christianity isn't too good to be true. It's good because it is true. I
I
love
stole it
that.
off someone else. It's not original to me.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you guys so much for all your wisdom that you've been sharing with us. If your question wasn't answered, or if tonight has brought up more questions in general, then we would love to tell you about the follow-up course that we have running. Serene?
So it's starting on the 11th of February and will run from 6 sessions on Thursday evenings on Zoom.
Yeah, so this course is called Just Looking. It's if you're just looking at the Christian faith, or if you just want to look into a little bit more. So the first night will be a themed evening just to get to know each other. And then from the 18th of February, we'll just be looking into the Christian faith.
So you can sign up for that by the link which will be on the chat, and it's suku.uk/just-looking. So
yeah, we're really excited about the follow-up course, and yeah, such a great team behind it. So if you've got questions, we'd love to see you there and answer them a bit more.
Thanks so much for coming tonight. And I hope you've taken something away from it.
Yeah, I found it so interesting, and yeah, it's such a great way to start the week.
So keep coming, join us for all the more that we've got coming on this week. So tomorrow we will be discussing, is there any purpose in our pain?
Yeah, so we're having a conversation about mental health and spirituality, and does God help? And then we've got so many other talks this week, a conversation for those who fight for the voiceless, a conversation for the hard worker, and a conversation for the inquisitive person. So I'm sure there's something out there for everyone.
Yeah, it's like such fitting themes as well. So definitely, I'm sure there'll be lots to learn from it. Also there'll be the international call, which happens at 1, and
yeah, and don't forget about Text to Treat. I'm so excited about Text to Treat. It's so fun to be running it instead of the beloved Text to Toasty. So if you have any maybe shorter questions that we'd love to be answering any of your questions, but if you text them in either on the Text to Treat Facebook or Instagram page, we will be sending out a video answer to you and then posting you a treat to any UK address. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, whether you're at uni or still at home, you can still join it.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, all for now at the moment, but do continue to have your conversations with the people you called, or in your houses, or just other people who you think would be really interested in this topic. Do continue to be having the conversations on campus.
Or join us and Emma and Michael on Zoom, where we can chat a bit more and just get to know each other, or just come back tomorrow. We'd be so happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon.
Bye.